Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you for yet another show with another awesome guest on Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, and of course with video here on YouTube. We are going to get right into this. I recently made a video about critical thinking versus denialism, and that was a subject I had been wondering about, started doing some research on, and in the course of doing that, came across Mark Hoofnagle and his blog, the Denialism blog, which is part of scienceblogs.com website, and he's been writing about this there since 2007, the subject of denialism. And this was something I was absolutely fascinated by as a sort of critical thinking in disguise kind of thing. There are people out there who present themselves as critical thinkers and throw out rhetoric that sounds, sort of critical thinking like, and yet is actually completely vacuous and empty and really doesn't forward any kind of critical thinking. And we put that in a bin called denialism, and we're going to talk all about that in the show here. So, Mark, thank you very much for being on the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, first off, why don't we let people know who you are and where you come from and all that? What's your education? What's your background? How'd you get into all this?
I got into this when I was a PhD candidate at University of Virginia, and a bunch of my friends were sitting around discussing how there was a great deal of commonality between different types of pseudoscience and the types of arguments they made. So more about the strategies they employed rather than the specific arguments they were making. And from that, I sat down and thought of these commonalities, and I boiled it down to what I saw as 5 essential ingredients for modern denialist argument. And that was the idea that most of these arguments are constructed primarily around a conspiracy theory. Because first off, you have to convince people why all the experts are lying and why the standard belief is incorrect. And that usually requires a lot of people to be engaging in some kind of dishonesty, some kind of group conspiracy to hide the actual truth, which the pseudoscientist actually knows. And then they construct the argument around that conspiracy by cherry-picking data, by latching on to fake experts who may have expertise in other fields, but certainly not in that field and don't represent the knowledge that exists there. And then when they're confronted with the flaws in their argument and additional evidence, what they'll do is they'll continue to move goalposts to try to avoid acknowledging that their argument has been defeated. And finally, they employ, just the usual logical fallacies to try to sustain arguments that are otherwise untenable and not by the data.
Did you? What is your PhD in?
I have a PhD in molecular physiology. I also have an MD. I was an MD PhD candidate at UVA, and now I'm a surgical critical care fellow and emergency surgery fellow at University of Pennsylvania.
Okay, cool. Oh, maybe settle something for me here, just on a kind of separate topic. Is critical thinking part of MD training? As
Probably
such?
Not explicitly. I think that, they never have a class where they sit you down and teach you these kinds of things. Like, here's how a legitimate and an illegitimate argument is constructed. And to some degree, they don't have to. If you're in a medical program, it kind of means that you're already aligned more or less with, the evidence-based view of the world. You've had a lot of introductory science classes. But just as there isn't really a similar explicit course in most undergraduate, pre-med courses, that they don't sit you down in medicine and say, here's how you detect a fraud. Here's how you detect a quack. And maybe they should. But then, that's just my medical school. Other medical schools may.
Well, it's something that we've wondered about, and I've had conversations with others about in terms of I'm trying to understand how scientists and doctors can get involved in certain woo practices and ideas or push some of this stuff. And of course, I'm looking at you, Dr. Oz, and Dr. Phil, and some of these people who get, into a bit of admittedly, with them, it's a little easier to understand because they're in a situation where they have advertisers. It's in their vested interest to peddle things that get them money, get them advertisers, get them popularity, which are not necessarily based on solid science. But one wonders about this how people have asked me, and I've been sort of, flummoxed myself. Isn't this guy a doctor? How can he be such a woo peddler,
Yeah,
Just,
well, doctors are not immune to ideology, and they're not immune to greed. And I think between ideology and greed, you can explain where people like Oz and the rest come from.
mhm.
They are adherents to a belief that health comes from things other than what we understand them to be in medical science. This idea that there's these invisible toxins out there that nobody can actually describe or measure, but just everybody's vaguely sure that they exist and need to be detoxified, or just the general concept of bodily purity is a ideological position that a lot of people hold, and a lot of the medical woo comes from this idea that there's a way that you can control your health. There's something that's actually within your control, and that's your ability to avoid toxic inputs and to eliminate toxins that build up or have accumulated in the environment. And you understand why people want that. It's very reassuring to think that you have more control over your health than you do. But sadly, I mean, even as a physician, I have to say, beyond exercise, not smoking, staying thin, there's not a whole lot of other ways to prevent many of the illnesses that befall us. I'm a trauma surgeon, so we focus on prevention in terms of firearm violence prevention and fall prevention, things like that. There's lots of ways that you can prevent explicit dangers in your life. But we're all going to age, and we're all eventually going to become unwell and be susceptible to cancer and things. And these ideologies allow people a sense of control over things that are out of our control. And frankly, aside from not smoking and a reasonable diet and avoiding alcohol, it's not easy to avoid cancer. If you live long enough, it's probably going to get you.
Interesting.
And in fact, certain kinds are certain to get you. They've done studies where they've basically sectioned cadavers and found that, everybody, if you live long enough and you section the thyroid fine enough, has thyroid cancer. And, men, if you live long enough, you're probably going to end up with some prostate cancer. And, these things are so common and out of our control. The appeal of somebody that says, here's a way for you to control this is enormous. And you can see why people fall for it.
Absolutely. Plus, the other factor that that I talked about actually in my recent video with the denialism, and that is completely understandable, is mothers or loved ones are faced with situations with their children or with their loved ones, with their family and friends, of people who acquire diseases or acquire situations, medical situations or otherwise that don't have cures, that don't have answers, that we don't know what to do about it with Western science. And so of course they're going to turn to other alternative forms of therapy, because what are they going to do? Sit and do nothing? I mean, that would be any human being would think that's ridiculous,
completely
right?
Understandable.
Yeah.
And you have enormous sympathy for folks like that. But what I don't have sympathy for are the people that look at those people that are suffering and say, there's an opportunity to make money.
Exactly.
There's an opportunity for me to exploit, to get some wacky idea I have across, or to gain fame, or to gain wealth. And this is where this goes from just kind of innocent belief, so people can think what they want. But when you actively start to harm people, to offer them cancer cures, to suggest that you can treat untreatable illnesses with quacky therapies, it's just totally unacceptable.
Exactly. Yeah, the money motivation is quite strong. But we do need to take care as critical thinkers to not paint everybody who's got some potential alternative therapy as quacks, because that's also how science moves forward, is through discovery of new things that we don't know about right now. So it's always a bit of a line of, judging intentions, judging motivations, judging pseudoscience versus, what could potentially be a interesting line of inquiry that may result in something, and maybe we should pursue that,
And I'm sure many of these people have the absolute best of intentions. I mean, I'm sure that, Gwyneth Paltrow is not, cackling maniacally about taking money from people who want to be well. She honestly thinks that she's doing the right thing, but she's not. I mean, what she's doing, there's no actual evidence that, to base, the things that she's suggesting through her website. And she's doing some things which that, if people were to do on a broad scale, could be actively harmful, as Jen Gunter's been pointing out on her blog. Her advice, especially with related to, the female reproductive tract, has gotten out of hand.
Right, exactly. And that's actually, it's funny you bring her up, because I actually put a picture of her with her Goop Foundation or whatever up as a picture, as an example of, what not to do when you're getting into pseudoscience, right? Because,
well-meaning, but...
Well, exactly, because it's just because in some cases, just because we don't know what causes, let's say, autism, we do know some things that absolutely, positively are not causing it.
Yeah.
Right? You can do that. You can rule some things out without necessarily nailing down what it is. And that's one of the things some people don't understand. And they go, well, who are you to say I shouldn't do this because you don't know? And you go, well, yeah, but we actually do know some things, So it's really worth the time when it comes to especially health and medical issues to take the time to do the research for yourself and dig in and really know what you're talking about versus taking the first or second or third, Google search item that came up on WebMD and going, okay, this is it,
Yeah, and seeking legitimate expertise. Google U is not an adequate substitute for a real doctor for a real medical condition.
Exactly.
And generally, physicians in the United States are very well trained and can, tell you what is useful and often maybe what people need to do, engage with them more about what they think isn't useful, because otherwise they'll probably go out and be fooled by any number of people that are bad actors who want to make money from fraud. And it's something that's been with medicine forever. Only in the last century have we gotten to the point where medicine is itself a high quality enough science as to really be significantly distinguishable from these types of quackeries.
Right.
And then critically, with the formation of the FDA about a century ago, and previously it was the Food Administration, then it became Food and Drug, after a terrible poisoning, poisoned over 100 children from a patent medication, which promised to cure all of your ails, but contained ethylene glycol or some other actual toxin or poison. And they realized that, we could no longer have this system now that we actually, have this kind of budding science of medicine where people can just say whatever they want and put it on a bottle and routinely engage in fraud. Instead, now you have to say, what's in this bottle does this, and I can prove it if I'm going to say it. That's since been weakened by folks like Orrin Hatch and Tom Harkin, and the alternative medicine industry has resurged somewhat, which is basically means that you can write what you want and sell what you want without any need to prove the difference. And that was actually the major innovation that probably led to the birth of the American pharmaceutical industry. This regulation, this idea that you had to prove what you're doing scientifically, was of enormous benefit. That, and in the last century, the AMA actually had a stronger tact on quacks and pseudoscientists and actually would pursue people that were actively harming patients. I think today's AMA is a lot more hands-off about this stuff and won't confront people who are even using a medical license, frankly, to perpetrate fraud. And I think that's a little disappointing. We used to have a stronger profession.
Mm-hmm. I think that the rise in profit in the alternative, therapy industry, let's call it, is probably analogous to the rise of what are those guys called, the televangelists who send us your seed money, your prayer money, and and the Lord will return it 1,000-fold upon you. Send us your dollar. And
they're selling you the illusion of control.
Right. That's right. And it really just does require critical thinking to discern the differences between people who are validly pursuing a valid line of inquiry scientifically versus people who are just promoting quack therapies. There's no one-stop shop to figure this stuff out. You've got to think. You've got to look. You've got to study.
And realizing that also we're going to be wrong from time to time. but we have self-correcting mechanisms, and
Exactly.
and we try really hard to limit error, correct error, prevent error. It's a huge portion of what we do all the time, day to day, week to week in medicine that people don't even see. Because patients don't tend to be privy to for instance, our morbidity and mortality and our quality improvement initiatives and our performance improvement initiatives and all these reviews that are invisible to the public, to see how much effort medicine puts into raking itself over the coals to constantly evaluate errors and try to prevent error and do the right thing for folks.
That's right.
And there's no such mechanism. I think I get to see the alternative medical practitioner who talks about their weekly M&M.
Right. That's right. There are standards. There's reasons why people are board certified, this kind of thing. And in the alternative therapy realm, they don't have boards. They don't have certification. They don't have licensing. And there's reasons why they don't, and don't want to have anything to do with that.
Or if they do, for instance, like naturopathic practitioners, it's largely a joke.
Right.
And it gives this kind of patina of credibility. And they've recently tried to claim that they're a different type of medical practitioner in a video. And it's like, no, you're really not. If they had to do or if they had to do what we do, or were subjected to the amount of review that we are, they would fold like paper. It would be it'd be a joke. They don't have any evidentiary basis for what they do, and they don't have these mechanisms our profession's created over the last century to really become a profession that is dedicated to service of mankind with layers and layers and layers of self-correction and thoughtfulness that I think the medical profession has.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So we think we've established pretty well the differentiation of what we're trying to do here and why we would fall, given a choice, why we would go with, a peer-reviewed, science, evidence-based, medical or any science discipline versus, well, I had a really good idea and this worked on my aunt, Jemima, and so I'm pretty sure it'll work on everybody else. That's not, please stop, hold off, let's not go in that direction. Now, with the denialism, it's not hard to connect the dots here to move into, you mentioned the 5 things that these guys do, but even more fundamental than that is it is a strategic approach to fooling people, and to justifying odd, non-justifiable or not evidence-based ideas. This denialism I'm talking about now. Is that how running into this, is that what's motivated you to write about this? Because it takes work to do what you do to fight back against this.
Well, I think initially when I came into it, I maybe had a harsher view of folks that are making this argument. And I think that, after interacting and learning about this process for years, I think what I've realized is that much of denialism is just human behavior. This is just the way we tend to think. And there's a bunch of really interesting research these days on the heuristics behind human cognition that are being done by folks like Dan Kahan at Yale and Brendan Nyhan, and at UVA you have John Hates at UVA, if I recall. These people are kind of looking at how people fall into these traps, like where this type of cognition comes from. What they're finding is rather than it necessarily being a specific strategy that people are purposefully engaging in, it tends to be the default system for cognition when people encounter something that they don't like or something that conflicts with their ideology. So your ideology and who you are in your tribe really defines you. And it's how you think about the world. It's about how you think about the people around you. So when you come across ideas that conflict, there's an extreme cost to accepting those ideas. Changing your opinion about one of these things may change, how you feel about people in your community, how you feel about people in your church, maybe how you feel about the job that you're doing. Mm-hmm. And that can cause such, a existential crisis that what people then do is that they deviate into this type of motivated reason. And motivated reasoning is another way to describe denialism. Denialism is just the structure of how people engage in motivated reasoning. And it's a way of trying to say to people, hey, look, when people start doing these things, it's because they're engaging in this identity protective cognition, is probably how Dan Kahan would phrase it. But what they're doing is they're protecting themselves, and it's a very natural human thing to do. And I think I've become a little bit more charitable over time to folks who are doing this, not to the ones who are kind of engaging in fraud and really disseminating fraudulent ideas, like the people who are kind of at the top of the misinformation pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
I think they kind of are, I think, active fraudsters and active hucksters, really, who disseminate disinformation. But the reason why people want to believe in it is very human, very understandable, and I think you have to, and it helps in terms of changing their minds. You have to have a lot of empathy for them, and reach out to them personally to try to explain why you want to change their mind, rather than just shouting you're wrong and this is denialism, this is what you're doing. I mean, you can point out to them why their cognition in this instance isn't healthy or productive.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes a lot more work to have somebody fundamentally change who they are. And that's what a lot of these things require.
Very, very true. I got into this work through coming out of a destructive cult. And you and I have not interacted a whole lot before this, but I used to be involved in Scientology.
I read about you a little bit before this, so yeah.
Yeah. And so coming out of that situation, it has been a vast interest to me to how to prevent that, how to help people out of those situations, how to help people
Mm-hmm.
recover from those situations. Right, my own channel has been sort of my own journey of recovery, and learning about all of this stuff, learning about critical thinking, and then
Sure.
progressing right into exactly what you're talking about is hand in glove with what I'm my mission, what I'm doing here. And it does, and I had to comment on that because just like you just said, it leads right to cognitive processes and theory, right? Because it's how we think. Why do people fall for stupid ideas? Why do smart people fall for stupid ideas? Well, because you can be really smart, but if you don't have the common sense or the critical thinking skills, it doesn't matter how much information you have at your fingertips. There are patterns of thinking and patterns of belief and ways we think that unfortunately some people are very, very good at taking advantage of.
Sure. Ideology is a hell of a drug, and
yes.
As we see more and more these days.
Yes.
But also, when it comes to teaching people critical thinking and getting people to to avoid kind of denialist reasoning, it does require pre-training. It's something that we should probably do more of from a younger age. There's been studies to show that it works, and there's been studies to show that inoculation strategies in terms of critical thinking, inoculating people ahead of time about wrong arguments that they may encounter, does help them deal with that in the future.
Big time.
So there is hope that you can make a difference and improve things by communicating how to think correctly. Now, at the same time, science communication is a field, and that's kind of disastrously off. Our most famous science communicators, I think, aren't doing a good enough job reading about the existing science that we have now on communication and cognition that's out there, and they ignore it, and we continually come back to skepticism as a information deficit model of irrationality. These people would believe the correct information if only they had more access to it. It's like, no, we all have access to the information. We all have access to all the information in the world right now. We have more access to information than we've ever had in our lives.
Yep.
It's not about an information deficit. It's about cognitive shortcuts that we take to protect ego and protect who we are and maintain our position in our tribe.
Yep.
And while realizing that's harder to deal with, it also means that the majority of science communication that people tend to engage in and professional organizations try to engage in that's based around information is probably fruitless. We need to spend more. We have to pay closer attention to the people studying science communication, because it is a scientific field, and it has a lot to say about what we do.
I could not agree with you more. In fact, I think even in my recent video, not having thought about having talked with you first, I said it's not about the facts. It's not the facts that really matter so much anymore. It's how we think about the facts. It's what we do with those facts. It's how we, are cognizant of facts versus opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Neil deGrasse Tyson is trying to address this to a degree where he's talking about science education and how science is a way of thinking, not a bunch of facts that you have to know and dates you have to memorize. It is a process of how you view the world.
Yeah.
He's trying.
He's an interesting guy to mention, and he is trying, and he's got his heart in the right place. But I think he's actually a believer in the information deficit model. I feel like he does that a little too much, and his heart's in the right place, and he's doing a great job getting the information out there, and that's important too. I mean, you need the information to be there at baseline. But I don't think he gives enough credence to the cognition aspect of it.
Well, I think you're probably right. I think that I think one of the things that he and Bill Nye are trying to do is yes, the information is out there, but I think they're also thinking with, is the information out there in a way that is palatable to the average Joe, in a way that communicates to them. If you watch Cosmos, you see that for somebody who is well educated in science, you watch Neil deGrasse Tyson's season of Cosmos. Really, really great information. I learned a lot, but you also see that it's kind of been one of the complaints about the show was, well, yeah, but it's kind of like for kids. And I said, yeah, because it needs to be, because most adults in this United States, in this world, have a 6th grade understanding of science at best.
Sure.
When you have flat earthers talking about why people don't fly off the face of the earth because the earth is spinning, you realize you're talking to people who have lost the plot on the concept of gravity and inertia. I don't think they could even tell you. I think if you held a gun to a flat earther's head, they literally could not define the term inertia, much less tell you how gravity really works. They will sit there and expound for hours on how gravity doesn't exist. And you just
think they're a special type.
Well, there are other factors. It's not just an educational deficit there.
Enjoy being contrarian.
There are. There's all kinds
and being
of
contrarian is important to who they are.
Yes.
They're somebody who has special knowledge.
Exactly.
I believe something that no one else believes.
That's right. You also
and that makes them feel special.
That's right. And you also have religious zealotry going on there as well.
Yeah.
Plus the conspiracy mindset, which I believe, and I have said, I think is in its worst stages, is a kind of mental health issue, because you're dealing with a level of paranoia that is unhealthy. When you're talking, when you have somebody advocating that all of NASA, all of the aerospace industry, every government on the planet is involved in some vast conspiracy, you're well beyond even the 9/11 truthers at that point in terms of a paranoid view of the world, But those are fringe. Those are minority,
But it's also a tough thing to conflate it with mental illness, because in the end, many of the things that we would consider mental illness, like personality disorders and things like that, they are exaggerations of normal human traits. Everybody's paranoid some of the time, and it's the question of whether or not that trait then becomes pathological for the individual. And in order to maintain, maybe their position in their community, in order to maintain their kind of their tribal membership, these beliefs might actually be quite healthy for them. This type of cognition might be necessary for them to maintain social standing. So if anything, rather than reflecting mental illness, it's actually the human as a social animal before being a logical animal. And so it's actually quite adaptive for them in their social network to believe these things. So I don't think that the mental illness thing is an accurate angle, because I think you're talking about normal modes of human cognition. Everybody does this when they're confronted with something they don't want to be true.
Well, fair enough, but when you're talking,
they haven't been trained to avoid it.
Well, yeah, but when you're talking to a flat earther, you're talking to somebody, or some of these 9/11 guys, you're talking to somebody who has taken this to an extreme that can only be described as unhealthy. I mean, you cannot you cannot just call it a cognitive bias when you have somebody who is
Sure.
asserting with, with practically with spittle coming out of their mouth that NASA is, some huge front group, and the United States government is fully in the know on this, as is the
Yeah.
French government, Chinese government, Russian government, UK government. I mean, all of these thousands and thousands, actually, I think at that point you're talking millions of people, are involved in an active knowing deception to fool them, and they've
Yeah.
somehow hit on the truth of this through their internet research, and now they know what's
Yeah.
going on in the world. You're beyond a normal level of cognitive bias at that point, I believe.
Does it create a social cost for them?
Yeah, well, of course it does. Yeah,
I think
I
I
mean,
certainly can. Like, I mean, if you bring these
yeah,
ideas out at work, I mean, you're not going to get a promotion. There's no question.
right,
And so, yeah, it is. There is unhealthy. It's just I'm very cautious about crossing the line to describing this as mental illness because
fair
one,
enough,
these are very human traits,
right.
and mental illness is something else. And mental illness doesn't mean that you're illogical or a bad person. I worry very much about wrongly ascribing things that we don't like to being mentally ill.
No, it's a I don't say it lightly. I say it hesitantly,
Mm-hmm.
and in full recognition that I am not a mental health professional, and it is an opinion. And
And nor am I. I
you
mean, I'm
know,
trained in it, but
yeah,
no one should take anything I say as being, that of a mental health. I'm a different type of medical professional.
fair enough. Yeah,
And
it's something I've thrown out there, really, with the idea of having conversation exactly like we're having right now. Is let's look at this
mhm,
and see, is this something that's true, or is Chris just kind of mouthing off? But I am very cautious and hesitant in going
mhm.
there, and it is not, it is not an effort on my part to paint an entire group of people with the "you're all crazy" brush.
Yeah,
It is a very specific criticism of very specific individuals, not
yeah,
a broad brush. But it can be conflated that way, and I understand it's controversial
yeah.
language.
And
Uh,
it takes often years of interacting with these people to kind of recognize that a lot of this is very human and ordinary behavior, just kind of writ large.
very, pretty large, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I have my own experience on it, and I know that at least for myself, uh, that it's possible to change hearts and minds with this, and so again, I don't want to make it sound like all of everybody who thinks the Earth is flat is insane. That's not the statement, right? I used to be a conspiracy theorist when I was involved in Scientology because L. Ron
Mhm.
Hubbard was a conspiracy theorist, and critical thinking saved me from that and got me out of that mindset. So people can change.
Yeah, and that's wonderful.
Yeah,
I'm happy for you to be out of that because it sounds like from your writings it was a nightmare.
it was a nightmare, to put it lightly. Now, getting back to the things you brought up in terms of how you recognize denialism and some of the symptoms and whatnot, what would be some other examples of how people might spot this? And then what do like, let's talk, like, okay, Gwyneth Paltrow stuff. I mean, maybe there's an
Hmm.
example, right? Of like, why, what makes you look at that and go, okay, well, that's just wrong. And what should we do about it?
Some of it is just because it's prima facie absurd. When you say that you can put a sticker on your body that channels energy and it's made of NASA space material, and then the first thing that NASA says is, no, that's not a material. It's like, yeah, these guys just they walk like a duck, quack like a duck. They're quacks. It's pretty easy
I
to
had
see
I hadn't heard
her
about
stuff
that.
coming.
I hadn't heard about the sticker
Uh,
thing.
it's fantastic. It's like $10 stickers to channel your energy. It's like, well, the whole energy channeling thing. But some of that's just experience and hearing things like energy channeling for a long time. And blah, blah. But I think the way that you should think about it, always in terms of whether or not you're being manipulated, is first of all, is the information that you're encountering generating an emotional response in you. You have to think about the way the information is making you feel as a kind of a first marker of something that's trying to appeal to your lizard brain, rather than your thoughtful, data-driven brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that you see, like, for instance, that they've learned about fake news is that the main purpose of fake news wasn't to be convincing or to be fully fleshed out, but to generate an emotional response, to make people angry. Because when you get that emotion out there, that's a way of pushing people out of their rational mind.
Yep.
And then after that, I think you should just instantly be suspicious when you hear somebody describe conspiracies, because and to distinguish very carefully that there's a difference between criminal conspiracy and conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory is non-parsimonious. It requires a bunch of people to be acting in concert with almost magical competence. It is a way to explain away data and evidence, to explain holes in a theory, whereas a criminal conspiracy is actually a pretty ordinary activity that happens all the time. And that's why we have the FBI, and that's why the mafia is actually a real thing. People getting together to commit crime, that's ordinary. And one of the first things they'll do is they'll try to conflate the two. They're very different things. Unfortunately, they share the same structure of their name. But a conspiracy theory, the second you hear that, you should perk up and be like, I am ready to disbelieve. You should automatically have distrust of people who are suggesting that in order to believe something, you require huge swaths of Americans to be lying to each other, and basically be engaged in a terrible conduct to explain why a piece of data is absent.
Right.
And that's an extraordinary statement, and it should require extraordinary proof.
Exactly. And it's amazing how that mechanism or concept of conspiracy that way is used across the boards. It's used used to delegitimize medicine. It's used to justify alternative therapies or crack cancer cures or this sort of thing. It's used to explain 9/11. It's used to explain terrorism and justification for insularity and nationalism. It's used it's used in the I don't know if Gwyneth Paltrow has brought it up yet.
There is just that kind of underlying pall of that the medical profession isn't out to make you well; they're out to treat sickness. So there's kind of this underlying idea that we don't treat the whole person, which is just totally crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Of course we treat the whole person. Now, granted, we have ways to kind of think of people systematically. That's rigorous and designed to make us think about interacting like physiologic systems, but that doesn't mean that we're not thinking about the whole person. It's a very weird argument that they always make, because I'm also an ICU guy, right? And we when we round on folks, we think of the person from their head to their toes, front to back, how their family is feeling. We are thinking about not just the whole person, but them and their family, and sometimes even the community. It's crazy that they make that argument.
Right.
But also it's crazy to believe in conspiracy theories as they're constructed, because they actually, somebody actually, I wish I remembered his name, worked out the mathematics basically of the likelihood of a conspiracy being undiscovered. And of course it's a function that has collapse once you go beyond a few people, because of the exponential need for people to maintain silence or maintain it or communicate with each other. So the probability of it being maintained from beyond more than a couple of people becomes impossible.
Right.
Within a certain amount of time, and with very loose constants, he basically showed that any of the big conspiracy theories would fall apart within months.
Exactly.
There's just no way you could get people to behave that way. And then you look at modern politics now, and basically you have criminal conspiracy again and again being uncovered, and we're kind of in the midst of one now. And these secrets don't get held very well. Our top spy a few years ago couldn't hide an affair. Petraeus got busted. He was the head of the CIA for an extramarital affair. Right. It's very hard to keep secrets, and you should be suspicious of anybody saying that they have secret knowledge.
Exactly, and it's again, it's just the way it comes down to our cognitive biases. I've been putting a lot of emphasis on my channel in recent months on the concept of biases, implicit and explicit biases, because I think these are big drivers for the cognitive failures that we have, as is to talk about it as a bias. I think our language is also an issue when it comes to being able to think through certain things and create cognitive errors because of the homonymic nature of our language, where you can't differentiate between a criminal conspiracy and a conspiracy theory because you have to use that same word,
Mm-hmm.
conspiracy, right? And this happens often where we have, one word to describe multiple concepts that are related but are not really precisely the exact same thing and create massive confusions. The
Yeah.
word I've made the example before because I firmly believe that this is a very important point with the word religion. I will use the word religion, or anybody will use the word religion to describe your own personal belief, what's in your head, but you can also use that exact same word to describe organized religion, which is, a group in a church. And the
Mm-hmm.
word religion applies equally to both. And so if I say religion is kooky, somebody might go, oh, you're insulting me and my beliefs. When I'm saying no such thing, I'm really saying that organized religion has some issues,
Sure.
right? But they instantly take it personally because they believe that I am attacking their belief,
And that
right?
allows them to dismiss anything that you may then be saying. And it's similar
Exactly.
with the conspiracy theory, conspiracy language, is that, they've detected that conspiracy theory is pejorative, right?
Right.
So then immediately when for instance, a political party talks about a criminal conspiracy, which is a completely different thing, they whip out that pejorative. And then
Mm-hmm.
when their listeners hear that, what that does is it allows their cognition mechanisms to just dismiss that information
Yep.
and then engage in identity protection again. So it's giving people an out, these little confusions. And, I, I think that people are going to figure out ways to do that no matter what.
Oh, well,
Our
people
language
are
is
pretty
imprecise,
clever.
and I
Yeah.
and I think they latch onto that. If they didn't figure out how to do it that way, they'd figure out how to do it another way because they're smart, and this is how you protect your ego. This is how you keep your beliefs intact, is that you defend them at all costs against all that inconvenient data and facts.
Right. Those pesky facts. I am wondering, what are your thoughts on where this should go in terms of how to improve the human condition or education or what?
Mm-hmm.
What's your idea on, or ideas? It doesn't have to be a single solution, of course, for
Mm-hmm.
dealing with this. What do we do?
Well, I do think it is important stuff, or I wouldn't devote all that effort to writing about it. I actually think that this is one of humanity's biggest problems.
I
I
do
think
too.
this is something that has consistently limited us and made us small, because
Mm-hmm.
what it does is it allows us to protect our tribal beliefs and our small beliefs and our hatreds and our bigotries, and to keep them safe against reality. And the things that make us great are things that we've come together to do as whole nations and the whole world, and like the scientific enterprise. And the scientific enterprise doesn't have national boundaries, and it's thoughtful and allows anybody in the world, no matter who they are, can engage and participate in it. And it's a wonderful thing. And it's completely in opposition to these small tribalistic human bigotries and racism. And I think that these kinds of modes of cognition, which are natural to us, need to be trained out from an early age. And training in logic and rational thinking should be part of primary school education.
Mm-hmm.
And the world would be a better place for it. Now, the problem is that all the vested interests and people maintaining tribal bigoted beliefs are going to resist that, because they know it's the death of their ideas to
Right.
be exposed to significant skepticism. And but that's the work, and it's been ongoing. I mean, look at the Platonic dialogue I was talking about of Georges. This was a dialogue of Socrates versus the sophists. It was this argument thousands of years ago. Recognizing that people can be rhetorically effective and totally full of nonsense, and
Right.
how do you counter that? So it's an old problem. We don't have a solution for it, but we know it's a problem. We know it's something that really limits us as a species. And right now, it's limiting us from facing our species' biggest challenges. So to
That's
say that
right.
it's just an abstract thing like, oh, we could be better. It's like, no, we could die if we don't address this problem. We could
That's
end
right.
up in serious trouble.
That's right. Because the full gamut of propaganda and denialism tools and strategies are actively in full bloom right now against something, against global climate change, for example.
Sure.
Right, and that is a species extinction situation that we're talking about. The planet's and even and we get it wrong like on every count. Save the planet. I love George Carlin on this. Hey guys, the planet ain't going anywhere. We are. we're the ones who are going somewhere, and it will 1,000% be our own damn fault if it happens.
Sure.
Because of the way that we have not evolved out of our self-defeating cognitive biases and habits and patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to speed this up somehow.
Yeah.
So I think you're right about the education. It's a matter of how to, it's how do we implement something like that? How do we get something like that going despite our self-destructive
Step
tendencies?
One.
Yeah.
Get scientists back in charge, or people who have respect for science back in charge.
Yeah, big time.
Because right now there's frankly no thought or consideration for scientists at all. The EPA is basically being defunded. They're talking about cutting millions and millions and millions, or even like over $1 billion from NIH. It's a disregard for science and factual findings that we're going into right now that could be devastating. It could be the way that we have to learn about global warming is from, continual catastrophe until it's just so ridiculous that it's all staring us on the face, and it'll be like, what were we thinking? Well, you defunded the EPA, you defunded NIH. And it's only with this kind of conspiratorial worldview that you can think that the NIH or the EPA is your enemy. These are the people that are assigned, scientists who are assigned to protect us, the citizenry, and they've been made into villains. And it's madness. So until we kind of correct the current political situation, I'm a total pragmatist. I would love to be able to vote for a Republican who endorsed science and had scientific leanings, like the Republicans that I think of in my family from decades ago who now can't vote Republican anymore because they're like, these people are crazy. Mm-hmm. They left them. And, without kind of going on a political rant, because I don't necessarily think that's helpful, we do need to have a move back towards respect for science and rationality. And, part of that was that we actually are probably shifting back to the default American status towards science and thought and intellectualism. If you read like Hofstadter's work in the 60s on anti-intellectualism and American thought, this is actually kind of the pervasive pattern. And then I think what happened is Sputnik flew overhead and the entire country freaked out. And all of a sudden, all of those geeks and nerds and people with specialized knowledge were very valued. And I think we had a golden age that lasted 50 years, and now it's dying.
I agree with you. And I think perhaps it even started maybe a little earlier with the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
At least the government valued them because they needed them for the war effort, right? And then the public, valued them because of the space race, and that was propagandized as the ultimate expression of American ingenuity and brilliance and genius. But took a lot of. But now there's been a lot of stabs to that idea since then, like you just said, yeah.
And now we have a similar challenge that we could face, but sadly we don't have anybody with the moral courage to look at it that way, to say that, here's an opportunity for humanity to get together again and do something scientific and amazing. And it's really kind of too bad that, maybe Al Gore was kind of that way, but, he was kind of undermined with just these kinds of attacks.
That's right.
And it's really too bad because it's this really kind of base way of human thinking and a base type of politics and anti-intellectualism that is probably part of American thought that just was suppressed for a period of time.
That's right.
And is catching up to us.
Big time. Hey, just so kind of opposite question, just to sort of throw something else different out there for a second. What would you say science gets wrong worst? Like, just to kind of go on the other side for a second and be critical on that
Mm-hmm.
end, because because there are issues and problems on that side as well, and we sometimes hold it up as this paragon, and people then are feel justified in going, well, you're just worshiping at the altar of science, right?
Sure.
So no, we're not. We're talking about a methodology of discovery and research that
Mm-hmm.
works. That's what we're talking about, not worshiping something. I really resent that whole argument. But what do you think that, from your perspective at this point, that we could be doing better on that front, or that is not working out so great, that needs to change on the science end?
I think I would make a weird argument here, and I think
Hmm.
that's actually that science should actually be a little less competitive. I think competition at a low level is probably healthy, but the problem is when competition becomes for survival. That's where we get into the problems with this constant push to publish or perish. I think that tends to push people towards sloppiness and fraud, and I think
Hmm.
it endangers the scientific enterprise. There should be competition in terms of like who gets to maybe something first, but not like competition for part of this is that we've lost a lot in terms of real dollars towards scientific funding, and people are feeling that squeeze. But also just the idea that survival is so incessantly required for or publication is so required for survival, and peer review becomes so vicious, and nobody wants other people. So other scientists kind of almost become obstacles to you. This morning, I was reading an opinion piece from Michael Gerson in the Washington Post, and he had a very interesting sentence. I liked it a lot. He was talking about other people, but he wrote a beautiful sentence, and and it was when when winning becomes religion, and failure becomes sin, cheating becomes oh man, I should actually remember it correctly. Cheating becomes a sacrament, I think is the way he put it.
Interesting. Yes.
And I think that science needs to do a better job at looking at the motivations it's creating and the kind of the drivers it's placing on scientists, because I think the level of competition in the field and the struggle to get published and to get funding is resulting in bad behavior. And I think that probably contributes some to the replication crisis, because if it's just publication at all costs and just sheer numbers of publications to try to justify one's existence, that's going to drive people to publish garbage.
Good points. All very good points. And also demonstrative of the fact that the cognitive biases and difficulties that we are talking about in the realm of denialism exist just as much in science, because it's
Mm-hmm.
human nature to be competitive. It's human nature to, be dog eat dog and that sort of thing. And just because somebody's a scientist doesn't mean that they nullify those instincts or ideas or urges that they have, and that's the challenges that we face in science, as well as we can be very critical of those things when we're looking at when we're looking at goofy
Mm-hmm.
ideas and conspiracies, but we also need to be cognizant of the fact that those factors get in our own way too.
Sure.
Those are good
Protecting
points
one's
that
own
you make.
ideas, one's turf, one's tribe in science. It's been known to happen. You get a bias that's based on, one old guy's view. And there's some people that have, joked that science progresses when, the old guard dies.
Yes, I've heard that. Yes.
We're susceptible to it too. There's the Nobel disease, where Nobel Prize winners are very famous for kind of going emeritus,
Hmm.
and start developing wacky ideas because nobody's pushing back on them anymore. Nobody can say no to these people. So then they start to think that every idea they have is great, and
Right.
there's nobody to say hey anymore. It's hard to tell the Nobel Prize winner, back down a little, Watson. But you've got to, because they're still human.
Right.
Just because they've kind of achieved this kind of pinnacle of achievement doesn't mean that we should pull back skepticism on their beliefs.
Exactly. it's a constant process of being skeptical, being scientific and rational, and discerning in your thoughts and whatnot is a constant process. It's you cannot ever let up on it, no matter who you're talking to. And this is again, this is one of those things where we when we don't deal with that within the scientific world strongly or forcefully enough, then we kind of give some degree of ammunition to the the woo side, who can go, well, you guys aren't any better because look at blah blah, sort of thing, and you just go,
I would say in our
come on,
defense, we have a mechanism for self-correction.
Oh, completely.
And we are very interested in self-correction. Whereas,
Absolutely.
Woo, one of the hallmarks of Woo is it is not interested in criticism. It is not interested in correction.
Exactly.
It doesn't have any mechanism to do so.
That's right.
The same nonsense that's around today is the same nonsense from 100 years ago. It never changes.
That's right. The formula for the snake oil is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mark, I really, really want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me here and go over some of this stuff. I think it's valuable. I think it's important that we, make efforts to educate the public and, out there. We're the public. They're the public. I mean, it's not like, some other species or something. But my point is, of course, that we need to get the education out there through any and all means. You're doing a great job at that. How can people reach you or reach your work?
I think scienceblogs.com/denialism. And, in terms of interacting with me, I'm on Twitter, and that's probably the easiest way to get my attention.
Great. Yeah, that's how I reached out to you.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, again, thank you very much. And all right, folks, we're going to wrap up the show here. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, good, bad, or sideways, leave it in the comments on YouTube or at sensiblyspeaking.com. I am very interested, curious about what you have to say about all of this, how you've experienced it, what you think about it, what some of the things that we've bandied about here. And I hope, although I'm sure that this is a useless hope, but I hope that I don't hear too much about how we are all just worshiping at the altar of science and don't have an open mind, because exactly the opposite is the case. All right.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Mark. Thanks for being on. And we'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.